Hi, Marcus.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good, good.
Good. I'm so delighted to have you on here today. Thanks for taking some time. I know you're very busy getting everything prepped for your televised fundraiser, Harlem Serves Up, this
Yes.
Saturday,
Yeah,
and we're
very
gonna get
excited.
and we're gonna get into that in just a moment. I wanted to kind of kick things off to talk about the heart of what this new Instagram live show is about, which is, the importance and impact that jazz music has had on folks from all walks of life. And I'd love to hear from you to share with us how has jazz shaped your life and the life in the world around you.
Well, I think it's jazz for me is an expression of very often of Black excellence. That's a starting point. And when, growing up in Sweden, my parents were constantly looking for culture and music and art in terms of the diaspora, whether it came from Africa, whether it came from African American culture. So jazz was something that was played at home, whether it was, my father introduced us to Miles and introduced us to Herbie Hancock and stuff like that. And it was an expression of really Black excellence.
Absolutely. And speaking of great jazz music, obviously Red Rooster and Jenny's are a cultural heart and soul of Harlem.
Yeah.
I've been to many shows at Jenny's Supper Club, and anytime you're in there, you just feel this like really magical feeling. I'm wondering, how do you envision your work changing or evolving in a post-COVID world?
Well, I mean, all of us, we have to learn how to pivot. This is a moment where pivoting is key, and understanding how to, just like what you guys are doing now, like you're working with an audience that maybe you normally would gather on a Friday night, like tonight, you would have a gathering, but now we just have to. People still want to be part of communities. People still want to learn about, what's the latest and what am I missing out on and so on. So, it's good for you guys to keep cultivating an audience and keep working on that. And, all of those aspects are stuff that we work on in the hospitality industry too. When people can't experience us the way Red Rooster particularly is a restaurant that has to be experienced, right?
Mm.
You want to come there to meet a friend and maybe meet some people you never met before. The music is a character in the space. The art is a character in space. Then you add the food and the hospitality. So we have to reimagine what that means now when, we can't really get together the way we are used to.
Right. And are there any particular musicians that you're very excited to see again play live? You can think of? I know there must be. I mean, there's so many
Yeah,
people
I
that
mean,
come and play the great stage, but so.
yeah, I mean, it is always, for me, it's really, Jono is such a great curator and he has a history from Lincoln Center as well. I'm always excited when he bring new, not undiscovered, but just new raw talent
Mm.
to the space. And it's also one of my favorite ensembles we had was an all Chinese jazz band, for example, right? Or we've had an all, just we've had a heavy metal band from Ethiopia, for example, right? Like it's outside the scope of jazz, but the identity of that for me is very jazz, it's very
Mm.
punk, it's very hip hop. It is an independent thought process, and I love that. So all we want to build at Genius and Red Rooster is really trust that just book a ticket, you will have amazing nights. So our Thursdays with Pedrito, for example, are amazing, right? And that's something that Jono was worked on in the forefront. Obviously we've had super established musicians like Marcus Miller, and we open with Roberta Flack and so on. But it was built to be a home for jazz musicians locally in New York, so they knew that there's another venue, there's another spot open where you can work at, which
Mm.
I felt this combination between eating and trust the voice of jazz was just fewer and fewer. And that was important for us to build something that all sides of the community can trust. The musicians, there's a home here. The audience, no matter what they have, it's going to be good. And us, there was something that we can learn,
Absolutely. And do you have any advice or suggestions on right now when things are obviously still closed down for the time being, how can we support those musicians and the staff, everyone behind the scenes? The best way to do that, I mean, I'm sure you can even go into what you're doing with your fundraiser as well.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's really about my industry, hospitality industry. It's under siege right now. It's very, very difficult. So, doing a fundraiser, Harlem Serves Up, is, again, we go back to the entertainment community, Dougie Fresh, Common, John Legend, amazing musicians, together with amazing entrepreneurs like Melba, like Lolo Seafood Shack. So it's like the local independent restaurants together with the best of entertainment. That's how we created Harlem Serves Up. And we get the 1 hour on ABC tomorrow at 7 o'clock. But I think it's also about being inspired by each other, that, I wouldn't be here without, what Paris Blues has built in Harlem for decades and decades, for example, right? Just to mention a place that was there for musicians always to know that they could come. Jazz is alive and well in Harlem in small and big venues. You have something called LA Jazz that is on 133rd and Lenox, for example. And it's an amazing jazz parlor that, can only discover in the Brownstone in Harlem. Mm-hmm. Go further up to Margie's spot at the parlor every Sunday. You have Margie and a family hosting a jazz parlor from 3 to 6. So this is the moment. This is a very difficult time, but I think it's important to listen to music, donate when you can, or help support in many different ways that you can. As a community, our love for the music and a love for the brilliance is not going to go away. And I just think it's like support the musicians the way you can. Pick up, download their music on Spotify, pick up an album if you can.
It's so interesting too that I'm talking to some friends who live in Massachusetts, and they're like, what's it like living in New York during the pandemic and what's going on? And it's interesting to be in the city where the allure is the community, right? So it's like you're going to these random places behind a door, and then you see this amazing jazz club, but it's the online community as well. And I don't know if you want to talk a bit about what folks can expect tomorrow from this online fundraiser.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really, we partnered with World Central Kitchen early in March when the pandemic really became big in New York and in Harlem. And we started it with Jose Andres, and eventually we got 20 restaurants in Harlem together, serving about 600 to 700 meals per restaurant for the neediest and the first responders. We did that through Harlem Eat Up, our food festival that we have every year. And then we want to convert the food festival to this telethon that's going to happen tomorrow. And, I have the luxury to live in Harlem and work in Harlem. So I see with my own eyes how we as a village right now are hurting. And Black and brown and indigenous communities and small businesses, it's really all up for grabs right now. And if we don't step in as community to help and support, I don't know how our community is going to come back. And as in America, we have a real choice right now. Do we only want big boxes? Or do we like that coffee shop? Do we like that jazz place? Do we like that bar? Do we like that barbershop? All retail, small retail is realistic. When the restaurants are really the soul of a neighborhood, the heart of a neighborhood, when they're gone, the independent small restaurant, so is all other small retail that makes up that neighborhood. So as communities, we're at a pivotal moment, and we really ask for people's support.
And I wanted to switch gears just a little bit, but it kind of does go in the same vein of what we were talking about. But for the month of July, Jazz Lincoln Center has been focusing all of our energy, output, and attention on the idea and spirit and meaning of freedom. So I wanted to pose a question to you. What does freedom mean like, look like, feel like to you?
Well, I mean, it's one of the main words you think associated with America, or used to.
Mm.
Hopefully you still can, right? And I think, I mean, I talk a lot about, I started a podcast at this moment called This Moment with a friend of mine, Jason Diakite. He's a rapper he's an American rapper, but he grew up in Sweden. And we talk a lot about this. What does it mean to be a black man, an immigrant, raising a black child? What does freedom look like with that perspective? And, you know, you go back to think about our parents' generation, particularly his father that grew up here in Harlem, and the things they had to fight through to create the freedom and the privileges that we have. But I think we are going through one of the most historical, important times ever in America right now, where the difference from maybe 68 is that through social media, it's more connected. And that means that the world is watching. So hopefully that can lead to change, systemic change. And hopefully, you know, already there's been a lot of changes. You know, you see laws changes after Breonna Taylor, for example, laws changes after George Floyd. It's just horrible and horrific that it has to go to the Ahmaud Arbery's and the Tamir Rice and the Breonna Taylors in order for change to happen. It's really, this is really time to reflect, and we have to constantly search in the best in us, not so much in the worst in us. And that's what you see very often.
Thank you for that really beautiful answer. And it's been interesting kind of, you know, as an organization looking at every different vein of freedom, right? Because you think freedom, oh, United States, land of the free, but that's, you know, there's so much more history to all of that. I thought it'd be kind of fun to, and I've seen a lot of comments in here asking some food questions. So I thought if you could maybe humor us here, give us some meal ideas, maybe one breakfast, one lunch, one dinner that viewers could cook up at home, and what jazz album or song you would pair that meal to.
I don't know, but I think that you think about jazz as a culture. It feels very improv, although it's highly trained and highly technical. And I think that's where chefs, I can learn a lot from jazz musicians too. We practice a lot, and then we want to control the dish. But sometimes the dish just have to be a little bit more improv, and that's how I cook at home, for example. So that balance between, you know, incredible practice and holding on to a structure that a dish needs to have, right? Needs to feel, you know, I build dishes in terms of building blocks. You know, you have salt, sweet, sour, bitter, heat, and umami. Those are the building blocks, right? And we do that through aesthetic and texture and so on. You know, those are similar building blocks as a musician can build songs through, you know. So I don't necessarily think about this as a breakfast dish, this is that. I think about, does the food have texture? How does it feel and look aesthetically? How does it eat? And then you think about, does it have these notes, you know? And I mean, a lot of my jazz friends are foodies as well. I mean, when I think about Robert Glasper, he thinks about food constantly. Christian Scott, you know, these are young, incredible musicians, but they're also, you know, they have roots in NOLA and Houston, which are great food towns too. So, And very often jazz musicians spend so much time in restaurant, bars, or on the road. So food becomes a very, very important part of their identity. And you think about one of the most famous dishes from Harlem was created by jazz musicians, which is chicken and waffle.
Mm. And I see someone asking here, who are your biggest inspirations in cooking and in jazz? And yeah, we'll start with that. There's a couple other ways to too.
But I would say, food-wise, I would say someone like Miss Leah Chase in New Orleans, that was not only a chef but also an activist, and also inspired to be in her community and hire her within her community, and also an advocacy for African American culture and art. You walk into her restaurant and there were, Jacob Lawrence, Lamar Bearden. So she really knew, she just passed last summer at 96 years old. But she really knew her power, and her place was more than just a place where people got some food. So she knew that her walls mattered, and she knew who she hired mattered, and she hired them from that community. So I would say that Miss Leah is probably the one that I'm the most impacted the most. But there's so many African American chefs, and this fall I'm launching a book called The Rise, which really pays homage to Black excellence in terms of chefs and what they've done to add value to the American food scene. And American food wouldn't be the same without the contribution of African Americans. And in terms of music, I think that, for me, Miles is beyond jazz, because it's also an engine for like new thoughts in general, and the way he also had a way to see talent, grew talent, and talent came from his band. Think about what American jazz would be without Miles, and all the talent that came from his band. So I think about that, and growing up in the 80s, and Herbie Hancock, again, is beyond just one genre. They're amazing musicians. But also think about the 70 musicians that played at Red Rooster every week, that we call Red Rooster home. All of those experiences informed me to make sure that we have that platform. And there's so many musicians that are incredible musicians and have to work several different jobs to be able to do their art. And those are real heroes to me, because I'm fortunate enough to be able to do my passion and be able to do that. I work hard, I work every day, but the brilliance of some of the most intelligent, most sophisticated artists we have in this country very often have to work several different jobs just to do their art.
And something interesting that you mentioned too, I mean, there's such a parallel between, you're becoming a chef and also, especially a jazz musician. You have all these mentors, right? So every jazz great had another jazz great who mentored them. I don't know if you can speak a bit about your mentors growing up and what your background is with cooking.
Well, I mean, my parents and my grandmother is really the people that trained me, and in terms of how to be outside the kitchen and in the kitchen. And then I traveled abroad. I mean, going to Japan changed me. Going to live in France was informative. So, to be a great chef, for me, coming from Sweden, you had to travel. I had to travel. And that's very often when you meet great musicians as well, So one thing we have in common right now, that we're not direct contact with our audience, both as a chef, as a jazz musician. So, I traveled, all over the world to cook, and so does Glasper, and so does all the great musicians. And so we are going through this time in a very different, it's out of our rhythm, and it you can feel it, and it's difficult. But it's also allowed me to start other things. Silver lining is I've spent more time with my son Zion and my wife. I started a podcast from my home. I want to share that in my podcast at this moment that, okay, I might be out of pocket, but that doesn't mean I don't have worth and doesn't mean I can't work.
Mm. Can you tell us a bit more about the podcast and where we can find it, where people can listen to it?
Yeah, I mean, this moment is available on Acast or wherever you find your podcast. It started with my musician friend, incredible guy, Jason Diakite, a rapper, American, but grew up in Sweden. And we decided to do it in English and talk about, we started during COVID, but it's also been a lot of talks about how we are as fathers and Black men. And we have some incredible guests on. Talib Kweli was just on that we're going to launch it. Kimberly Jones teaches us about Black Lives Matters and the movement. We have some great guests coming up. Thelma Golden's going to be a guest. Hill Harper, and we're going to have Jerobi from Tribe Called Quest and so on. So for me, it's about going back to the roots of art, music, food, and that's very often a starting point to me. And then the world, the way these artists see the world through that, right? We're talking to an incredible woman, Karen Washington, which is a Black female farmer, an activist, just rad, incredible, bright minds that, we also have an interview coming up with George Floyd, attorney. So just keeping it a perspective on culture, art, and what's happening in this moment. That's what it's called, This Moment.
It sounds really powerful. I'm excited to check that out. And I know that you also had a really great jazz cookbook, audio cookbook as well, which, if you want to talk about that as well, maybe how your journey to putting that out.
Yeah, I mean, all my last cookbooks, I've always had a music playlist. And with Our Harlem, it was the first digital cookbook ever to be done. And we had these amazing storytellers like Dapper Dan, Lana Turner, just iconic Harlem Village, superstars. And we talked a lot about the Great Migration, and we talked about the Harlem Renaissance, which so much of what we think about as pop culture today stems from, right? And I mean, Our Harlem is an Audible original. You can find it there. But all my books and really has music right next to them. And even at the rise that's coming out this fall, I talk about how music and art, Black art and Black music, has really well defined what genre you're listening to. If you're going to listen to bebop, hip hop, jazz, gospel, R&B, rock and roll, all African American led art forms. But that is a hope, and that is an invitation to something. Food, I want it to be equally identified as that when you think about Black food. And certain places have done that better. Like when we think about Jamaican food, we think about jerk, we think about things. But Black food is not monolithic. It's delicious. And the Rise will unpack that a little bit.
So people asking what the name, and we're talking about the book called Our Harlem. There's Marcus has a lot of books, really wonderful books, but this is where specific an audio book, and the first ever. That's pretty cool. And I know I had to let you go because you have another engagement at 3 p.m. But I want to thank you so much for joining us as our first ever guest for Jazz Intersections. And I want to
congratulations, it's a great initiative, and there will be innovation out of this difficult time. Maybe you wouldn't have started this. So, there is the way to go back, encourage our creative to really think creatively what you can do to connect with an audience, because it's going to be more important than ever. All right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks so much for Marcus for joining us. And I hope everyone can tune in tomorrow, as Marcus was talking about. Join us for Harlem Serves Up, Saturday, July 18th, tomorrow at 7 p.m. on ABC 7 New York. And it benefits Harlem Park to Park, Uptown Grand Central, City Meals, WC Kitchen. You can head to www.harlemservesup.com for more details. And I hope you can join us again next Friday for our next Jazz Intersections. We'll have another guest and talk about all things jazz and life and art and and whatnot. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you next time.